The ringing of the telephone came at 7:30 in the morning. I almost did not answer it. At the ripe old age of 73, the reception of the telephone call had one explanation in the world of the living and the rest in the world of money: that someone had died, or someone had the audacity to require that I send them money. My hand shook as I reached to answer the ringing telephone. 4 words drew the curtain on 50 years. "Mr. Barrett, it's about Cambodia." My coffee cup exploded as it landed on the tiles in the kitchen. The reddish-colored liquid soaked into the reddish-colored earth in much the same way that blood permeates parched earth. I had not heard the name spoken in 40 to 50 years. If you like listening to stories about honoring the people who served, then subscribe to our channel. We post a new military story every day of the week so we can bring you the voices that matter. My name is Thomas Barrett. Most people call me Tom. For 50 years, that's all I was. Just Tom. The guy who worked at the post office, the quiet neighbor who mowed his lawn every Saturday, the grandfather who showed up to every baseball game but never talked about his own past. Nobody knew what that antenna sticking out of my rucksack had cost me. Nobody knew about the voices in my radio that went silent one by one in the jungle. The path to becoming a radio telephone operator wasn't something I chose, not really. When you're 19 years old in 1969 and your draft number comes up, you don't have many options. I was working construction in Omaha, helping my dad build houses when the letter arrived. My mother cried for 3 days. My father just nodded and said, I'd do what needed to be done. That was his generation. You didn't question, you served. Fort Polk, Louisiana. Basic training in the summer. 100-degree heat and humidity that made Nebraska feel like Alaska. Drill sergeants who could strip you down to nothing with words alone. I learned to shoot, to march, to follow orders without thinking. I learned that being average meant staying invisible. And in the Army, invisible meant you might survive. After basic came advanced individual training at Fort Gordon, Georgia. That's where they taught me to be an RTO. The instructors made it sound almost boring. You'll operate the radio, you'll maintain communication, you'll relay messages. What they didn't say, what they couldn't say, was that in Vietnam, the RTO had one of the highest casualty rates in the infantry. The enemy learned early that if you could identify and eliminate the guy with the radio, you could cripple an entire unit. They taught us radio procedures, frequency management, encryption. We learned to break down and reassemble the PRC-25 blindfolded. We learned to string the antenna in ways that wouldn't catch on every branch in the jungle. We learned the phonetic alphabet until it replaced normal speech in our dreams. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. The words became more familiar than our own names. But nothing they taught us in Georgia prepared us for what that radio would mean in combat. How it would become both lifeline and target. How the weight of it would feel like carrying the lives of every man in your platoon on your back. How the crackle of static would become the sound of hope or despair, depending on what voice came through. I arrived in Vietnam on February 3rd, 1970, Cam Ranh Bay. The heat hit me like a physical blow when they opened the aircraft door. It wasn't just hot. It was wet heat, heavy heat, the kind that soaked through your uniform before you took 3 steps. The smell was different too. Aviation fuel, red dust, something cooking, something rotting. All of it mixing into the scent of a country that didn't want us there. They assigned me to the 25th Infantry Division, Charlie Company, 1st Platoon. I met Lieutenant Hayes the day I arrived at base camp. He was young for an officer, but moved with confidence. He looked at my new uniform and new boots and probably saw what I was, a scared kid who was about to learn things no 19-year-old should have to learn. "You're the new RTO," Hayes said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Good. You stay close to me. Always. That radio is my connection to everything. Battalion, artillery, air support, medevac. If that radio goes down, We're on our own. Understand? Yes, sir. He studied me for a long moment. You're going to see things, Barrett, things that will stay with you. But right now, all I need you to do is one thing. Keep that radio working. Everything else, I'll teach you as we go. Can you do that? Yes, sir. That was February. By May, I'd been in 4 major firefights and countless smaller contacts. I'd learned to sleep with one hand on the radio handset. I'd learned to recognize incoming mortars by sound alone. I'd learned that the jungle never stopped trying to kill you, even when the enemy wasn't shooting. I'd also learned what it felt like to hear a man's last words through a radio speaker. To coordinate a medevac for someone you knew wouldn't make it. To call in artillery danger close and feel the ground shake while praying you'd given the right coordinates. The radio was never just equipment. It was responsibility weighed in lives. Sergeant Duke Morrison taught me how to move through the jungle. Not the manual way, the real way. Don't step over logs. Step on them and then down, he'd say quietly. Never grab vines to steady yourself. They might be booby-trapped. Watch where the Vietnamese walk. They know where the mines aren't. Duke was the kind of NCO who kept young soldiers alive through experience and patience. He'd done 2 previous tours and volunteered for a 3rd. When I asked him why, he said something I didn't understand until years later. Because somebody has to look after the kids they keep sending over here. The platoon became my family. Specialist Rodriguez, our medic, who carried extra morphine and sometimes extra prayer. Private First Class Johnson, point man, who moved through the jungle like a ghost. Corporal Williams, who'd been in country for 10 months and had a calendar in his helmet where he marked off each day. We lived in each other's pockets. We knew each other's fear smell, our nightmare patterns, the way our hands shook before dawn patrols. And through it all, I carried that radio. 23 pounds of Lifeline and Target. The antenna marking me for anyone who looked. Every patrol, every ambush, every firefight. I was there, 5 meters behind Lieutenant Hayes, waiting for the call that would need my voice and my radio to save lives. When they told us we were crossing into Cambodia, there was no fanfare, just orders. Intel said there were enemy base camps and supply depots across the border. Our job was to find them and report. Simple. Except nothing in war is simple. We crossed the border on May 5th, 1970, 3 days before everything changed. The jungle in Cambodia looked the same as the jungle in Vietnam, thick, hostile, indifferent to our presence. But the feeling was different. We were deeper in enemy territory, farther from support. The radio became even more critical. Those 3 days before the firefight at the bunker complex, I transmitted hourly status reports. I coordinated air reconnaissance. I maintained contact with battalion as we pushed deeper into Cambodia. Lieutenant Hayes relied on that radio like it was oxygen. When we heard other units making contact, when we heard casualty reports coming over the net, he'd look at me and I'd know what he was thinking. Keep that radio working, no matter what. I slept with the handset next to my head. When my hand would unconsciously reach for it during the night, checking it was still there, Duke noticed. "The radio doesn't sleep, Barrett," he said one night. "But you need to. Trust your watch. If something happens, they'll wake you." I tried. But every time my eyes closed, I imagined the radio failing, the batteries dying, the antenna snapping, the handset going silent when lives depended on my voice reaching someone who could help. So I slept light, and I checked that radio constantly. May 8th arrived with a red sunrise. In Vietnam, we'd learned that red sunrise meant rain was coming. But this was Cambodia, and all the rules might be different. Hayes gathered us at 0530, and I knew from his expression that today would be different too. I was 20 years old when I became a radio telephone operator in Vietnam. RTO. 3 letters that made you a walking bullseye. The enemy knew what that whip antenna meant. It meant communication. It meant coordination. It meant if they could drop the RTO, they could cut the head off the snake. Every firefight, every patrol, every single moment in that jungle, I carried the radio that kept my platoon alive. And everyone who wanted us dead knew exactly where to find me. The morning of May 8th, 1970, started like every other morning in Cambodia. Hot before the sun fully rose, humidity so thick you could taste it. I was in 1st Platoon, Charlie Company, 25th Infantry Division. We'd crossed into Cambodia 3 days earlier as part of the incursion. The official line was, we were there to disrupt enemy supply routes and base camps. The reality was, we were walking through hell with targets painted on our backs. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes gathered us at 0530 hours. He was 23, a college graduate from Michigan who still believed the war could be won with proper tactics and clean execution. Good officer. The kind who actually gave a damn whether his men came home. I respected him for that. Listen up, Hayes said, crouching in the center of our defensive perimeter. Intelligence reports a bunker complex 2 clicks northwest. We're going to recon, assess, and report. Standard patrol formation. Barrett, you stay on my 6. I want that radio close. I nodded. The PRC-25 radio on my back weighed 23 pounds. With batteries, spare equipment, ammunition, water, and the rest of my gear, I was carrying close to 70 pounds through jungle that wanted to kill you just for existing. The antenna added another 3 feet to my height, swaying above my head like a flag that said, "Shoot here." Sergeant First Class William Morrison, everyone called him Duke, was our squad leader, 15-year Army veteran. Duke had done 2 tours already and moved through the jungle like he'd been born there. He caught my eye and gave me a slight nod. In Duke's language, that meant, "Keep your head down, kid." We moved out at 0600 hours. The jungle swallowed us within minutes. Triple canopy vegetation so thick the sunlight barely penetrated. Vines and roots trying to trip you with every step. The smell of rot and growing things, and your own fear sweat mixing into something that lived in your nostrils for months after you left this place. I stayed 5 meters behind Lieutenant Hayes, my eyes constantly scanning. The radio crackled occasionally with check-ins from other units. I kept the volume low, just loud enough to hear through my handset. In the jungle, sound carried. The wrong noise at the wrong time could get everyone killed. At 0915 hours, we found the bunker complex. It wasn't just a few fighting positions. This was a full base camp. Underground bunkers reinforced with logs and earth, interconnected tunnels, weapon caches, the works. Hayes raised his fist, and we all froze. Duke moved up to the lieutenant's position, and I shifted to maintain distance while keeping them in sight. Hayes turned to me and made the hand signal for radio. I moved forward in a low crouch, bringing the handset to my ear. He whispered the coordinates and situation report. I keyed the mic and transmitted to battalion, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. Blackbird 6. This is Blackbird 1-6. Over. Static. Then, Blackbird 1-6. This is Blackbird 6. Send it. Over. I relayed the coordinates and described what we'd found. The response came back within 30 seconds. Blackbird 1-6. Maintain position. Air support inbound. ETA 30 minutes. Mark target with smoke when ready. Over. I acknowledged and passed the information to Hayes. He nodded and signaled the platoon to establish a security perimeter. We'd wait for the birds to soften the target, then move in for battle damage assessment. That's when the first shot cracked through the jungle. Private Miller, positioned on our left flank, went down. The sound of the rifle report came a half-second after the impact. Sniper. Then the world exploded. The bunker complex wasn't abandoned, it was full. Muzzle flashes erupted from a dozen positions, the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixed with the heavier thump of a machine gun. Someone screamed. Hayes was shouting orders, but I could barely hear him over the noise. I hit the ground and immediately reached for the radio. My training took over. While bullets chewed up the vegetation around me, I keyed the mic. Blackbird 6, this is Blackbird 1-6, contact, heavy contact, grid coordinates. Something punched my left shoulder. Not pain, just pressure, like someone had shoved me hard. I kept talking, relaying our position, requesting immediate gunship support, medical evacuation. My voice stayed steady even as I felt warmth spreading down my arm. I could hear Rodriguez screaming for a medic, calling for himself, the bitter irony of a medic being hit. Williams was laying down suppressing fire, his M16 on full auto. Johnson, our point man, was probably already flanking, trying to get a better angle. I couldn't see him, but I could see the results. Enemy fire shifting to track someone moving fast through the jungle. Hayes was hit. I saw him go down 10 meters ahead of me. Duke was already dragging him toward the cover, returning fire with his M16. The platoon was scattered, everyone finding whatever protection they could in the jungle floor. I crawled forward toward Hayes and Duke. The radio antenna kept catching on vines, jerking my head back. I ripped it free and kept moving. Blood from my shoulder was soaking my uniform, but I couldn't stop. Hayes needed the radio. The platoon needed the radio. Without communication, we were dead. Every meter felt like a mile. Bullets cracked overhead. I could hear them hitting trees, snapping branches, churning up the dirt. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the jungle rot. My left arm was going numb. I used my right elbow to drag myself forward, the PRC-25 grinding against my spine. I reached their position behind a fallen log. Hayes was conscious but bleeding from his leg. Duke had a field dressing pressed against the wound. The lieutenant's face was pale, but his jaw was set. "Barrett," Duke shouted over the gunfire, "I need a medevac bird now." I was already working the radio. My left arm wasn't responding right, so I used my right hand to key the mic while wedging the handset between my shoulder and ear. "Blackbird 6, this is 1-6. We have casualties. Request immediate dust-off. Hot LZ grid." The machine gun found us. Rounds hammered into the log we were using for cover. Bark and wood splinters exploded. I curled around the radio, protecting it with my body. If that radio died, we all died. Hayes grabbed my good shoulder. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. "Tom, listen to me. You keep that radio working, no matter what happens. You understand?" I nodded. He was right. I was the lifeline. Everything depended on that PRC-25 staying operational. "Barrett's hit," Duke said, seeing the blood for the first time. "I'm fine," I said. My voice sounded steady. That surprised me. "Your shoulder? I can use my right arm. Radio's still working. That's what matters." Duke looked at me for a long second, then nodded. He understood. We all understood. The mission was survival. And survival meant keeping that radio alive. The firefight intensified. I could hear wounded men screaming. I could hear Duke shouting orders, trying to organize our defense. Corporal Williams was on the radio net, talking to the other squad leaders, establishing fields of fire. And through it all, I kept working the radio. I called in our position to the gunships that were inbound. I walked them onto the target, adjusting fire, danger close, bringing the miniguns and rockets down on the bunker complex while we were less than 50 meters away. The jungle shook with explosions. Trees burst into flames. The smell of napalm, sharp, chemical, burning, cut through everything else. "Blackbird 1-6, this is Thunder 7-3. We have your position. Request marking." I looked at Duke. He understood immediately. Someone had to mark our position so the gunship wouldn't hit us. In the smoke and chaos, visual identification was nearly impossible. I pulled a smoke grenade from my vest. Red smoke. I pulled the pin and threw it as far as I could toward the enemy positions. "Thunder 7-3, mark red smoke." "Roger, identify red smoke. Rolling in hot." The gunship came in low and fast. I could see it through gaps in the canopy. A Cobra, sleek and deadly. Miniguns screamed, rockets streaked down. The bunker complex disappeared in smoke and fire, but they weren't done. Even as the gunship pulled off its run, I could hear return fire. They were still shooting, still fighting. Between fire missions, I coordinated medevac. 2 birds were coming in. I had to mark the landing zone while keeping the enemy suppressed. My left arm was useless now. Everything was going gray at the edges of my vision, but my right hand stayed on that radio. Rodriguez crawled up to our position. His own wounds were bandaged. He'd patched himself up so he could help others. He looked at my shoulder. "That needs treatment, Barrett. After we get the birds in. You're going to pass out." "Not yet." He gave me that look medics give when they know you're being stupid, but also understand why. He pulled out a syringe of morphine. "No," I said. "Need to stay clear." "Half dose," Rodriguez insisted. "Takes the edge off without putting you out." I nodded. He jabbed it into my thigh. 30 seconds later, the pain went from sharp to distant. I could think clearer. The radio traffic needed all my focus. I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember being on my feet, running toward a small clearing where the choppers could land. The radio bounced against my back. The antenna swayed above me like a beacon. Bullets followed me. I could hear them snapping past, that distinctive crack when they break the sound barrier close to your head. Someone was shouting my name. Duke, probably. Or Hayes. But I couldn't stop. The clearing was 30 meters away. The birds needed a landing zone, and I was the only one mobile enough to mark it. I reached the clearing and pulled a smoke grenade from my vest, yellow smoke. I popped it and threw it into the center of the LZ while diving back toward the tree line. I keyed the mic. "Dustoff 7-2, this is Blackbird 1-6, I have yellow smoke, over." 1-6, this is Dustoff 7-2, I identify yellow smoke. "That's affirmative, come on in. Be advised, LZ is hot. We are taking heavy fire from the west." The first Huey came in fast and low. Door gunners opened up with their M60s, suppressing the tree line. The bird touched down for maybe 15 seconds. 4 wounded men were thrown aboard, Rodriguez coordinating, prioritizing by severity. Then it was gone, climbing and banking hard to avoid ground fire. I could see tracer rounds following it up into the sky, but it made it. 4 men were going home, or at least to a field hospital where they had a chance. The second bird was coming in, but we had more wounded than space. I was coordinating with Duke, prioritizing the most critical casualties. Hayes insisted he could wait. His leg was bad, but he wasn't going to bleed out in the next 10 minutes. Private Miller was unconscious. The sniper's bullet had hit him in the chest. Rodriguez was doing CPR between calling for the bird. Johnson was hit in both legs. Williams had taken shrapnel from a grenade. We had to choose who got on the next bird and who had to wait for a third. That's when the machine gun found the second helicopter. I watched tracer rounds walk up the side of the Huey as it came into land. The bird shuddered, but the pilot kept coming. He was committed. He was going to get our wounded out or die trying. I stood up. I don't know why. Training, maybe. Or something else. The morphine had dulled the pain enough that I could move. I stepped into the clearing, fully exposed, and started walking fire missions onto that machine gun position. I gave the coordinates to the gunship overhead. I adjusted their fire. And I kept myself between that machine gun and the landing helicopter. The antenna above my head drew their attention. Every weapon in that bunker complex started shooting at me. I could hear rounds cracking all around. I could feel the impacts in the ground at my feet. Dirt and vegetation erupted. But I kept talking on that radio. I kept adjusting the gunship's fire. Thunder 7-3, shift left 50 meters. Bunker complex, heavy machine gun. Copy, shift left 50, rolling in. The gunship came around for another run. I marked the target with my last smoke grenade, purple this time. The miniguns opened up. I could see the earth erupt along the bunker line. Then the rockets hit. The machine gun stopped. The medevac bird lifted off with the last of our most critical wounded. Miller was on it, still unconscious, but alive. Rodriguez had climbed aboard too, his own wounds worse than he'd admitted. But we still had men down, and we were almost out of ammunition. I got back on the radio and called for resupply. I called for more gunship runs. I called for reinforcement. I called for everything I could think of to keep my platoon alive. My voice never shook. The radio never stopped working. And somehow, impossibly, I wasn't hit again. Duke appeared next to me. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, not his own. "Barrett, you crazy son of a bitch," he said. "You just stood in the open and called fire down on your own position. It worked. You're bleeding like a stuck pig. I'm still standing." He laughed. It was the laugh of someone who's seen too much death and isn't sure what's funny anymore. But it was still a laugh. The third medevac bird came in 20 minutes later. The enemy fire had been suppressed. The gunships had destroyed most of the bunker complex. We were still in danger, but the immediate crisis had passed. Hayes was on that third bird. Before they loaded him, he grabbed my hand. "You saved us, Barrett, all of us. That radio, keeping it working." "Just my job, sir." "No," he said. His eyes were fierce. "It was more than that, and I'm going to make sure someone knows." They flew him out. Duke stayed with the platoon. So did I. We held that position until reinforcements arrived, another platoon from Bravo Company. By the time we could pull back to base camp, it was almost dark. The battle lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. By the time reinforcements arrived and we could pull back, the jungle was burning. The bunker complex was destroyed, and half my platoon was wounded or dead. 14 of us walked out of that jungle. 6 were carried out on stretchers. 4 never came home. Private Miller died on the medevac bird before it reached the field hospital. Rodriguez lost his leg, but survived. Johnson recovered and went on to finish his tour. Williams was sent stateside with a medical discharge, and I was patched up, given a week to recover, and sent back to the field. Because they needed RTOs. They always needed RTOs. They put me in for a Bronze Star with V device for valor. Said I'd maintained communication under fire and helped save lives. I accepted it quietly. It felt strange to receive an award for doing what I was supposed to do. The radio was my job. Keeping it working was my job. The men who didn't come home, they were the real heroes. The ceremony was brief. Company formation. A colonel I'd never met pinned the medal on my jungle fatigues. Duke stood in the formation and caught my eye. He nodded. That meant more than the medal. I finished my tour 3 months later. September 1971. I flew out of Tan Son Nhut Air Base on a commercial charter. The stewardesses smiled and thanked us for our service. Most of us just stared at nothing. The transition from combat zone to civilian aircraft in a matter of hours was jarring. My hand kept reaching for a radio that wasn't there anymore. We landed in San Francisco. I remember walking through the airport terminal in my uniform. I remember the looks. Some people smiled. Others looked away. One woman spit on the ground as I passed. A protester called me a baby killer. I kept walking. I'd learned in Vietnam that some fights aren't worth having. My father picked me up. He drove me home to Omaha in silence. After 2 hours on the highway, he finally spoke. "You all right, son?" "Yes, sir." "You sure?" I wasn't, but I said, "Yes, sir," anyway. He nodded and didn't ask again. That was his way. The war generation didn't talk about feelings. You buried them and kept moving. Coming home was harder than being in Vietnam in some ways. In the jungle, you knew the rules. You knew who the enemy was. You knew what your job was. Back in Nebraska, nothing made sense. People complained about gas prices and television shows and yard work. They had no idea, no concept, and I couldn't explain it to them. I got a job at the post office. It was quiet work. Sorting mail, delivering packages. The routine helped. Wake up, work, come home, Sleep. Repeat. Don't think too much. Don't remember. But at night, the radio calls came back. I'd dream I was keying the mic, calling for medevac, but no one answered. Or I'd dream the antenna broke and I couldn't fix it. Or I'd dream I was back in that clearing with bullets all around, and the radio went dead, and everyone died because I failed. I'd wake up reaching for the handset, checking for the radio. It took several seconds to remember I was in Nebraska, not Cambodia, not Vietnam. Home. I met Sarah at the post office. She worked at the counter, all smiles and efficiency. She asked me out to coffee after I'd been there 3 months. I said yes because she didn't ask about Vietnam. She didn't look at me like I was broken. She just saw Tom. We got married in 1973. Small ceremony. My parents, her parents, a few friends. Duke sent a card from Arizona where he'd retired from the Army. Inside he'd written, "You did good, kid. Keep doing good." Sarah and I had our first daughter in '74, Jennifer. When they handed her to me in the hospital, I held her like she might break. Sarah laughed. "She's tougher than she looks," Sarah said. "I know, I want to keep her safe." "You will." Our second daughter, Amy, came in '77. By then, I'd been promoted to supervisor at the post office. Life was normal, stable. The nightmares came less frequently. I could go whole days without thinking about Cambodia. But May 8th always hit hard, every year, the anniversary of that firefight. I'd wake up and the weight of the radio would be on my back again. I'd hear the crack of bullets, smell the gunpowder, feel the blood running down my arm. Sarah learned not to ask about those days. She'd just make coffee and sit with me quietly until I came back from wherever I'd gone in my head. The girls grew up. Jennifer became a teacher. Amy became a nurse. They both asked about Vietnam once, when they were teenagers. I told them I'd been a radio man, that I'd helped coordinate things. They seemed satisfied with that answer. I didn't tell them about Miller dying on the medevac bird, or about Rodriguez losing his leg, or about standing in an open clearing with an antenna marking me as a target while I called down hell on the enemy. Some things you don't share with your daughters. Some things you carry alone. The years passed. 70s became 80s. 80s became 90s. The Vietnam War became history in textbooks. My daughter's generation learned about it in school like it was the Civil War or World War I, something that happened to other people a long time ago. I retired from the post office in 2005. 35 years of sorting mail and delivering packages. They gave me a plaque and a small pension. I shook hands with people I'd worked with for decades and realized I'd never told most of them I was a veteran. Retirement meant too much time to think. Sarah suggested I join the local VFW post. I did, quietly. I'd show up for meetings and sit in the back. The older veterans, World War II and Korea, would talk about their service openly. The Vietnam guys mostly stayed quiet. We'd nod at each other. We understood. One night at the VFW, a guy about my age approached me. I'd seen him at meetings but never spoken to him. "You were in country?" he asked. "Yeah. You?" "Marines, Da Nang, 68 to 69. We shook hands. He looked at me closely. "You were infantry?" "Yeah, RTO. His expression changed, respect mixed with something else. "That's rough duty. It was a long time ago. You ever talk about it?" "Not much." He nodded. "Yeah, me neither." We stood there in silence for a minute. Then he said, "But maybe we should. Maybe keeping it all locked up ain't doing us any favors." I thought about that for a long time after, but I still didn't talk. What was there to say? I did my job. I came home. A lot of guys didn't. That was the whole story. Sarah died in 2015. Cancer. It was fast, 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. I held her hand at the end and she smiled at me. "You kept me safe," she said. "All these years. You kept us all safe." I didn't correct her, didn't tell her I'd failed to keep a lot of people safe in 1970. She meant well, and maybe, in her own way, she was right. I'd kept my family safe. That had to count for something. After Sarah passed, the nightmares came back. Not every night, but enough. I'd wake up alone in the bed we'd shared for 42 years and reach for her. Then, I'd remember. She was gone. Like Miller. Like Hayes eventually. Like so many people I'd tried to protect. My daughters checked in on me. The grandkids visited. Life continued. But I felt like I was waiting for something. I didn't know what. Just waiting. Then came the phone call. 50 years after Cambodia. 50 years after that firefight. 50 years after I stood in a clearing with an antenna marking me for death while I called down salvation for my platoon. Mr. Barrett, this is Colonel Sarah Mitchell from the Department of Defense. I'm calling regarding your actions on May 8, 1970, in Cambodia. Are you the Thomas Barrett who served as RTO for 1st Platoon, Charlie Company, 25th Infantry Division? My mouth was dry. Yes, that's me. Sir, after a comprehensive review of historical records and witness statements, the Department of Defense has determined that your actions on that day warranted higher recognition than you received. The Secretary of Defense has approved an upgrade of your Bronze Star to the Medal of Honor. President Miller would like to present it to you at the White House next month. The room spun. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? She did. Word for word. It was real. After 50 years, someone had looked at what happened that day and decided it meant something. That I meant something. That keeping that radio working while bullets tried to end me wasn't just doing my job. It was something more. Colonel Mitchell explained that Lieutenant Hayes had written a letter in 1971 recommending me for the Medal of Honor. Duke Morrison had written one too. So had several other men from the platoon. But somewhere in the bureaucracy of the post-war drawdown, the paperwork had been lost or misfiled or simply forgotten. Then, last year, a historian at the National Archives found the letters while researching Vietnam-era radio operators. He'd tracked down the after-action reports, the medevac logs, the gunship gun camera footage. Everything matched. Everything confirmed what Hayes and Duke had written 50 years ago. I called Duke that afternoon. He was 88 years old, living in Arizona, running a small security consulting business. His voice cracked when I told him. Damn, Tom. About time. I wrote that letter in 71. Told them exactly what you did. Guess it took them a while to read it. You wrote a letter? Of course I did. So did Hayes. So did Johnson and Williams and half the platoon. We all saw what you did. Standing in that clearing, drawing their fire, keeping that radio working when you were bleeding and should have been on the medevac bird yourself. That wasn't regular duty, Tom. That was something else. I couldn't speak. Didn't know what to say. Duke's voice softened. You saved a lot of lives that day, including mine, including Hayes. About time someone official recognized it. He flew out for the ceremony. So did the families of Lieutenant Hayes and 3 other men who'd been in the platoon that day. Hayes himself had passed away in 2008. Cancer. But his widow Ellen and his 2 sons came. Williams came, 75 years old now, walking with a cane from the shrapnel wounds that never fully healed. Johnson came from Texas, still moving like a point man, even at 73. My daughters helped me shop for a suit. Amy took charge of logistics. Jennifer handled the media requests. Apparently the Pentagon Public Affairs Office wanted to do interviews. I declined most of them. This wasn't about publicity. This was about something private being made public after 50 years. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my hotel room in Washington, holding the Bronze Star I'd received 50 years earlier. It was in a small case in my closet at home. I brought it on impulse. There was a knock on my door. Duke. Thought you might be awake, he said. We sat together in the hotel room, 2 old men who'd been young once in a jungle that tried to kill them. "You scared?" Duke asked. "Terrified." "Good. Means it matters." "I don't deserve this, Duke. I was just doing my job." He looked at me for a long moment. "Tom, you and I both know that's bullshit. What you did that day went way beyond your job. And the fact that you don't see it, that's why you deserve the medal more than anyone." Standing in the White House, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, I felt like an imposter. These medals were for people who did extraordinary things. I'd just been an RTO doing my job. But when President Miller placed that medal around my neck and read the citation, I heard details I'd never known. The citation mentioned that I'd exposed myself to enemy fire 3 separate times to maintain communication, that I'd called in 9 separate gunship runs while wounded, that I'd coordinated the evacuation of 16 wounded personnel while under continuous fire. That, witnesses reported, I deliberately positioned myself as a target to draw enemy fire away from downed aircraft and wounded soldiers. That last part made my throat tight. I hadn't thought about it like that. I'd just been trying to keep everyone alive. The radio was how I did that. If drawing their fire to me meant the medevac birds could land, well, that was the job. After the ceremony, we gathered in a reception room. President Miller came over personally, shook my hand, thanked me for my service. Ellen Hayes, the lieutenant's widow, approached with her sons. "Tom," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Marcus wrote about you in his letters from Vietnam. He said if anything happened to him, you were the one who would make sure everyone else made it home." He was right. Her sons shook my hand. One of them looked just like Hayes had, same eyes, same jawline. "Our father never stopped talking about May 8th, the son said. "He said you were the bravest soldier he ever served with, said you earned this medal 50 times over. I'm just sorry he's not here to see you finally get it." I couldn't speak, just nodded. Duke pulled me aside later. We stood in a quiet corner while official photographers took pictures of other people. "You know what you did that day, Tom?" Duke said quietly. "You reminded all of us what we were fighting for, not the politics, not the strategy. Each other. You could have hunkered down behind that log with me and Hayes. You could have called in fire missions from cover. But you stood up. You made yourself the target. You did it so the rest of us could make it home." His eyes were wet. So were mine. "I was just doing my job, Duke." "We were all just doing our jobs, kid. But you did yours when every instinct was screaming at you to run. That's what this medal means. It means someone finally recognized what we knew all along. You're the reason a lot of us are still here." That night, back in my hotel room, I held the medal and thought about all the years in between. 50 years of normal life. 50 years of wondering if what happened in Cambodia mattered to anyone but the men who were there. 50 years of carrying that weight quietly. The medal itself was heavier than I expected. Blue ribbon with 13 white stars, the star-shaped medallion featuring Minerva, the goddess of wisdom and war. It hung from my neck during the ceremony, and now rested in its presentation case on the hotel desk. I thought about Miller. 20 years old when he died, never got to go home, never got married or had kids or grew old. The sniper's bullet ended everything he could have been. And here I was at 73, receiving the highest military honor, while Miller was just a name on a wall in Washington. That didn't seem right. But Duke's words kept echoing. "You're the reason a lot of us are still here." Maybe that was it. Maybe the medal wasn't just about what I did. Maybe it was about what happened because I did it. 14 men walking out of that jungle instead of 4. 16 wounded soldiers making it to field hospitals because someone kept the radio working and called in the birds. Hayes going home to Ellen and their unborn son. Duke surviving to mentor thousands more soldiers over his 15-year career. The radio had been my responsibility, But what came through that radio, the gunships, the medevac birds, the resupply, the reinforcements, that saved lives. My job was to keep the connection alive, to be the voice between men in danger and the help they needed. I'd done that, even when it meant drawing fire, even when the smart play would have been to stay down and protect myself. The radio mattered more than I did. The lives it could save mattered more than my own. 50 years ago, I understood that instinctively. Standing in that clearing with bullets snapping past and an antenna marking my position, I made the calculation without thinking. My life versus all their lives, easy math. But I hadn't thought of it as heroic, just necessary, just the job. Maybe that's what heroism was, though. Doing the necessary thing when it terrifies you, when every survival instinct screams to run, when the cost might be everything. You do it anyway because the alternative, letting people die when you could save them, that's worse than dying yourself. I pulled out my phone and looked at the photo Jennifer had taken during the ceremony. Me, standing between Duke and Ellen Hayes, the medal around my neck, my daughters behind us, my grandchildren in the front row. 4 generations connected by one moment 50 years ago when I chose to stand up instead of staying down. Sarah should have been there. She would have been proud, maybe embarrassed by the attention. She was never one for fanfare. But proud that her quiet husband, the mailman who never talked about Vietnam, had done something that mattered. I opened my wallet and pulled out a faded photograph. Charlie Company, 1st Platoon, February 1970. 28 young men in jungle fatigues, M16, and uncertain smiles. I found myself in the back row, skinny, baby-faced, the radio handset visible over my shoulder. Lieutenant Hayes was in the front center, his platoon, his responsibility, and he trusted me to keep them connected, keep them alive. I tried to identify the others. Williams was there, 3rd from the left, Johnson next to him, Rodriguez in the 2nd row, Miller on the far right, his whole life ahead of him. 4 of those men never made it home. 14 did, at least from that day. By now, how many were left? Duke was 88, Williams 75, Johnson 73, same as me. Time was taking what bullets hadn't, but for a while, for those critical hours on May 8, 1970, we'd beaten time and bullets both. We'd fought together, bled together, and most of us had survived together. That counted for something. Maybe that's what the medal really honored, not my individual actions, but the collective will to survive, the refusal to leave anyone behind, the commitment to protect each other even when it cost everything. The radio was just the tool, the weapon. The same way a rifleman has his M16 or a medic has his aid bag, I had the PRC-25. And when the moment came, I used my weapon the way it needed to be used, aggressively, without hesitation, accepting the risk because the alternative was unacceptable. There was a knock on my door. My daughter Jennifer. "Dad? You okay?" I let her in. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the medal case. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's heavy." "I bet." She paused. "You never told us, about any of this. Growing up, you just said you were a radio man." I was. But not just a radio man. What you did, what they described in the ceremony, that's... She trailed off, searching for words. "It was a long time ago, Jenny. But it still happened, and we never knew. Mom never knew. Your mother knew what she needed to know. That I loved her. That I'd do anything to protect our family. The details from Vietnam, those were mine to carry. Was it hard? Carrying them alone? I thought about that. Really thought about it. Sometimes, but talking about it wouldn't have made it easier. Some things you just live with, and after a while they become part of you. Not good or bad, just there. She reached over and took my hand. I'm proud of you, Dad. I wish I'd known to be proud earlier, but I'm proud now. That meant more than the medal, more than the ceremony, more than any of it. The next morning, Duke and I had breakfast in the hotel restaurant. He ordered eggs and bacon and complained about his cholesterol medication. I ordered the same and didn't mention my own medications. We were old men now, Vietnam veterans in our 70s, still pretending we were invincible. What are you going to do now? Duke asked. What do you mean? You got the medal, the recognition, the ceremony. What's next? I hadn't thought about it. Go home, I guess. Back to normal. Normal, Duke smiled. Tom, you stood in an open LZ with every gun in Cambodia shooting at you so medevac birds could land. I don't think you've ever been normal. I was a mailman for 35 years. You were a mailman who saved 16 lives in a firefight. That's different. We ate in silence for a while. Then Duke said, you should talk about it, you know. What happened? Not for you, for the young guys, the ones serving now. They need to know what it means to do the job even when it costs everything. I'm not a speaker, Duke. Neither am I, but I talk to veteran groups sometimes. Tell them about guys like you. Guys who did the extraordinary thing without thinking it was extraordinary. It helps them understand what service means. I considered that. Maybe he was right. Maybe the medal came with a new responsibility to tell the story. Not for my own glory, but so people understood what RTOs did, what all soldiers did, the quiet heroism of doing your job when your job might kill you. I'll think about it, I said. Good, Duke grinned. 50 years you've been thinking. About time you started talking. On the flight back to Nebraska, I sat by the window and watched the country pass below. 50 states full of people who would never know what Cambodia felt like, who would never understand the weight of a radio or the sound of bullets or the sight of your friends bleeding out in red dirt. And that was okay. That was good, actually. We'd fought so they wouldn't have to know those things, so their biggest worry could be traffic or bills or what to have for dinner. We'd carried the weight so they could live light. The medal was in my carry-on bag, carefully packed in its presentation case. When I got home, I put it in the case on my living room wall, next to the Bronze Star and my unit citations. My granddaughter would ask about it. And this time, I'd tell her the truth, not to brag, not to glorify war, but to help her understand that sometimes ordinary people do extraordinary things. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That service means putting others before yourself, even when the cost is high. I tell her about the radio, about the antenna that made me a target, about Lieutenant Hayes and Duke Morrison, and all the men who trusted me to keep them connected to salvation when hell surrounded us. And I'd tell her that 50 years later, someone finally recognized what we'd all known in that moment, that the radio operator standing in the kill zone, calling down fire and evacuation while bullets tried to end him, was doing something worth remembering. They finally called my name, 50 years later. But the truth had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. The medal didn't erase those years. It didn't bring back the men we lost. It didn't fix the things that war breaks in people. But it did something unexpected. It gave me permission to let go of the question I'd carried for 5 decades. Did I do enough? The answer was yes. I had done enough, more than enough. And it took 50 years for someone in Washington to say it out loud, but now it was said. Now it was official. Now the antenna that made me a target, the radio that kept us alive, the voice that called in salvation while bullets tried to silence it. Now all of that was recognized as something worth honoring. I'm 73 years old. I'm still just Tom. The guy who worked at the post office, the quiet neighbor, the grandfather at the baseball games. But now, when my granddaughter asks what the medal in the case on my wall means, I have an answer. It means I was there. It means I did my job when it mattered most. And it means that even when the world forgets for 50 years, the truth has a way of coming to light. They finally called my name. And when they did, I was ready to answer. Recognition doesn't have an expiration date. The men and women who serve often do extraordinary things that go unnoticed for years, sometimes decades. But the truth persists. When we acknowledge those who stood in the gap, who made themselves targets so others could live, we don't just honor them. We honor the principle that service and sacrifice matter, even when nobody's watching, even when it takes 50 years for anyone to say thank you. Have you ever witnessed someone receive recognition they deserved but had to wait years to get? Or do you know a veteran whose service went unacknowledged? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We bring you real military stories every single day, stories of courage, sacrifice, and the human experience in uniform. Your support helps us continue sharing these important voices.